I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.
John Hugg, many of you know John Hugg and have known him for years as we have. He has taught thousands and thousands and thousands of students here over the years about his history. He has lectured many places about his history. He flew 17 combat missions during World War II in Asia, plus the multi-force show of strength over Tokyo Bay on Victory Day. Over Japan, 1945. That's quite a legend. He then, when he retired from the military, he spent 16 years in weather reconnaissance. He flew planes ranging from the North Pole to the Philippines and around Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some of the work involved atomic air sampling. Weather Recon had John Hugg flying converted B-29s, B-50s, and B-47 bombers. The planes received a W at the front of their names after modifications, like taking out refueling equipment not needed on the shorter, faster missions. He finished his military aviation career in C-130s. He piloted the big cargo prop planes in the Vietnam War in 1968 and 1969. He retired as a lieutenant colonel at a base near Abilene, Texas in 1971. I'll let him tell you the rest of the story. So John, if you would please come up. And we'll have questions and answers afterwards.
I have to lift my feet over these cords. Okay, thank you, Sue. That was quite an introduction for an old guy like me. I'll be 95 here in a couple of days. And so this is my companion. I'm honored today to have my wife, Nalita, my daughter, Donna, and her husband here today to listen to me rattle on about some of my military life. I'm going to talk today on hurricane hunting. I want that sheet of paper here. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Dave. I've got a lot of things to read. You know, if I knew I was going to talk about hurricanes 60 years ago when I was flying them, I'd saved a little more information. So a lot of this stuff I had to write down from memory, and we chat about it. Idaho is a place that's out of mind, out of sight, out of mind, the old saying. Many of you, how many of you have been in a hurricane where it hit? Quite a few. I'd say about 20-some. Well, they're no fun, and I'm sure that when the hurricane hit where you were at, you would wish the hell you'd gotten out of there because they're pretty ferocious, and a lot of people lose their lives. And I'm going into some of the statistics on that. What is a hurricane? It's the simplest, the differences or changes of atmospheric pressures, or density, which causes heat and moisture to form a cyclonic action. Simple. My definition is a lot of wind and a hell of a lot of water. The responsibility for hurricanes, for notification and so forth, is the National Hurricane Center at Miami in Florida. And they're under the satellite program of National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they have a satellite some 400 miles above the Earth, and they can track the storms now, but there's a lot of information that's needed on hurricanes that the satellite won't give you, such as direction, wind speed, which are two of the most important things. When I was flying these in Bermuda, I went to Bermuda in 1952, and I had been instructing in B-29s. I got over 7,000 hours in B-29s, by the way. I went there and ended up as chief pilot when I first got over there because of my flying time. And the hurricane people were stationed at Bermuda, and we called the Hurricane Hunter Squadron. It was the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron. We flew daily flights out of Hurricane south towards Puerto Rico, and incidentally over that what they call a very dangerous area where all these airplanes have gone down. We never heard of it before, but we had daily flights over that. And you see it on television once in a while where they've lost so many airplanes in that particular part of the ocean. But it never seemed to bother us. We had daily flights down to Puerto Rico. We operated out of Puerto Rico, sometimes Miami, depending on where the storm was at. Tornadoes, typhoons, and hurricanes. In the northern equator, most of these, all of them are counterclockwise direction. South of the equator, of course, they are in the opposite direction. In wind speed in each, tornadoes are much worse than hurricanes as far as damage goes, but it only occurs normally over city-wide, maybe 8-10 miles wide. But hurricanes can end up at 500 miles wide where they do damage to the coastline and inland. Hurricanes have three killers: winds over 200 miles an hour, flooding due to heavy rain, and storm surge. That storm surge is the worst one. And my advice, and I think almost anybody's advice, if a hurricane's approaching and you think you're going to be in the path, get the heck out of there, because most people wait too long. The hurricane ends up worse than they predicted. A lot of people are killed every year with hurricanes coming in where they could have gotten out of the road. The most dangerous thing on a hurricane I'll mention is water. This is storm surge. You take almost anywhere in the coast of in the Gulf or in the Atlantic, people build right on the water level, up a few feet off the sand, all along the coast. And when you have a storm surge come in, depending on how bad the storm is, it could be up to 12, 15 feet of surge. That'll wipe out most of them. Normally they're not that high, but almost every year, storm surge takes out a lot of houses that are built right on the beach. Let's see, let's have a picture up here, see what we got first. Okay, I think I explained this here. These are the category the designer put on hurricanes, 1 up to 5 on the miles per hour, and those miles per hour are only gained by hurricane reconnaissance, by airplanes. Satellite cannot provide the winds. So the satellite can provide the direction the storm is going and the speed or the velocity over a period of time of what the direction is. But the most important thing is winds and storm surge. So when you speak of hurricane being 3, category 3, and then maybe a day or two later, all of a sudden it's 4. This is what they're talking about here. Winds have increased quite a bit. Can we control hurricanes? The answer is no, not yet. I happened to be in, when I was stationed in Bermuda, they tried silver iodide, dropping silver iodide right in the eye of a hurricane when it was off coast. Nothing happened. We had missions where we put balloons in the bomb bay of a B-29, released balloons inside the hurricane to see what the winds would do and where they would think would do. That was unsuccessful. They thought of even using atomic bombs, but then the political ramifications came into effect on that one. Planes used, the first airplane to ever go into a hurricane was an AT-6. I thought we had one in here, I guess. Anyway, fellow went into it, and I think he went back into it the same day, the second time, and that was the first airplane to go into a hurricane. And from then on, they've been flying them. B-17s were used. Later on, B-29s, WB-29s, WB-50s, and the difference between a 29 and a B-50 is that the 50 had bigger engines. It had the 4360s, which are 3,000 horsepower, 3,500 horsepower, excuse me. And then they went to the B-47, which was a jet. A lot of you people are familiar with the B-47. They've got a good article on them here in the museum. The B-47 was my favorite airplane, mainly because the missions were short. They were only up to 6 hours, but all my B-50, B-29 time, my missions were 14 to 16 hours. And you kind of get tired of those after about 10 years of it. But that's where you really build up a lot of flying time. The problem with the B-47, it was not stressed for hurricane flying. And it was only stressed for 3 Gs. The B-29, B-50 were stressed for 10. And when I first started flying hurricanes, I was pretty scared because I was thinking the airplane's going to fall apart because of tremendous up and down drafts. And sometimes it would take 2 people to hold the airplane. And you keep thinking, my God, it's going to pull the wings off. Well, I found out that the B-29 and the 50 were stressed for 10 Gs. And you or me are only stressed for about 2 or 3. So we'll black out a long time before the airplane even thinks of coming apart. But after I learned that, I kind of dropped my fear attitude on penetrating into a hurricane because I knew the airplane could take a hell of a lot more than I could. So if I could keep awake, and the airplane going, we could survive. Later on, I got into the B-47. I'll tell you about a mission on that later on, but it was one of my most memorable. And the C-130, and of course that was the later airplane, and it's also stressed for 10 Gs. And we flew the E model, which the last few years have been exceeded by different later models that are much better. But I flew those in Vietnam for 2 years also, the E model. The 130 is air conditioned. You've got real comfortable seats on it. It's only a crew of 3 normally, unless you're have something to do with loads. And then you carry a load master with a few people to help load and unload airplanes, which we like in Vietnam. But the 130, again, is stressed for 10 Gs, and it's a much more comfortable airplane. The 130 complied, or they gathered data recording every 10 and 30-second intervals. And this was transmitted back to Miami, which was the Hurricane Squadron, or Hurricane Center. And they would analyze it and send out all over the world. All your weather reports at every station, even Boise, everywhere in the world, it comes out of Miami. And they transmit that within minutes almost. Let's have another picture on Well, that was my hurricane card on that back one there. This is probably one of the only pictures that I took, and this was at 500 feet. Now, in the old days, I'm talking old days, 1950 to 52, we used to penetrate at 500 feet off the water. That's got one problem. You aircrew members know what barometric pressure is. You've worked with it. When you penetrate into a hurricane, we usually did it from the southwest quadrant, which is normally the lightest winds. As the hurricane is moving the water, it's compressing the air ahead of it, and the isobars, if you're familiar with isobars, are getting closer and closer, and the closer they get, the more wind you have. On the penetration, we used to do it in the quadrant that we'd get the least turbulence. And there's one quadrant in a hurricane that you never went into because it would just almost tear you apart. And that's the one where it's pushing forward in the direction of travel. When you're flying and penetrating into the hurricane, you're getting precise information and geographical locations. And we would go in, penetrate the eye, and get barometric pressure readings and so forth. Usually circle, climb in the eye up to 10,000 feet, and drop a drop sign. I think I've got a picture of one of those later on. Give me another picture. This is just, it's hard to see, but you can see a little white froth on the water. Winds at that time were about 125 miles an hour on the surface. And that's our weatherman right in the front of the B-29. Okay, next picture. This shows some waves of the storm as we're going into the eye. Go ahead, another picture here. This gives you and all of you have seen these on television. This happens to be a hurricane off of Yucatan. I don't even remember the year, but it shows you approximately where it was at in Hawaii. And you can see it's counter rotation, and if it's north of the equator, it'll be counter rotation direction. That particular area there, compared to the Florida, you can tell it covers about, it probably covers 500 to 600 miles wide. And that's where you get into a lot of damage and when it hits landfall. Next picture. This is a B-29 that was used for hurricane. You can see it still has the turrets on it, but when they got into weather service, they took the turrets off of it. Next picture. That's the B-50. Now, they look alike, except the engines are quite a few more horsepower. We had tip tanks for extra fuel, and that happens to be a gunship also, so that's not actually a weather B-50. If the W is in front of it, it's been modified for weather. Next. That's the B-47. So it's a 6-engine jet, very fast airplane, and I'll tell you a story of flying that. That was my favorite airplane. I got about 2,500 hours in that, and I really, really loved it. That particular airplane killed a lot of people because it was very unforgiving. And it would fly, if you held that straight and level with full throttles, it would keep increasing airspeed till the wings came off. And when I went through the B-47 school, my instructor, on my last ride with my instructor, said, I want to show you something, and you'll probably never forget it, which I haven't. But we were 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and he just pushed the throttles on up to 100%. And I just saw that old airspeed kept rising and rising. It got up to 425 indicated, and he said, now watch this. He took the aileron, and the aileron is a half of a wheel like it is in a lot of the airplanes. He took that aileron, racked it clear over as far as it go against the stop, and the airplane just kept flying level. Other way, didn't change the airplane at all. And he said, now look out at the wingtips. That wing just curled like that. And I said, that's enough. My God, that scared the hell out of me. Just that whole wing of that airplane just twisted, and it kept flying straight. So that airplane was capable of, like I say, flying until the wings came off of it. So 425 was the fastest. It was actually a little faster than what you had control of it. Okay, next airplane. That's a bomber airplane there. Put the gear down. This is a WC-130. That's the one we use as of today. And it's a very good airplane, very comfortable airplane to fly. Got a lot of room in it, and it's capable of doing their mission. In 52, I mentioned that we used to penetrate at 500 feet off the water. If it rained, and it always was raining, if it rained hard enough where you could not keep inside of the water, you had to your rules were you climbed to 1,500 feet and leveled off. Nowadays, the new procedure on the new hurricane squadrons now, they penetrate at 1,500. The reason for that is your barometric pressure drops so rapidly when you're penetrating into the eye that if somebody doesn't keep adjusting your altimeter, the pilot's altimeter, you're going down, but you don't know it. And at 500 feet, the weatherman who was stationed in the nose of the B-29 and B-50 would just lean back, turn around, and keep adjusting the altimeter for the pilot, because he had 2 radar altimeters that gave him exact altitude above the water. But we lost an airplane in the Pacific in the typhoon because of that. I think that they didn't adjust that altimeter often enough, and the guy just flew right into the water. If you fly, many of you have flown over water, and you know if you're flying down to within a couple hundred feet off the water, for a period of time, you lose that power to recognize elevation, and you can just get slower and lower and lower until you fly into the water. It's a very funny feeling, but it's over water flying at low altitude is very dangerous. I had the privilege of briefing Edward R. Murrow, and the old timers all knew him, in Bermuda on a hurricane flight. And I didn't get to fly him, but I wished I could have. But very nice gentleman, and as you know, he had a cigarette in his mouth all the time. And I put my best pilots, of course, aboard the airplane, but they had a very uneventful mission, but he got to fly a hurricane, and he had it on his program the very next night in New York on See It Now. And some of you might have seen that program. That was one of my most memorable things in there. Worst storm. I want to mention I had climbed to 1,500 feet on a penetration. And we hadn't got into the eye, and we're going in on it. And this is on the B-29. And my navigator called me. He said, "John, you got to make a turn one way or another." He said, "We've been sitting still here for 10 minutes. And he had navigation. He had radar navigation. The old, can't remember the name of the set, but it was very accurate. But we were actually sitting up there in 200-mile-an-hour winds, which is the basic speed of the B-29, and sitting still. So I went back out of the storm and took my brave pill, turned around, and I went right back into it. But some of those things are very weird, and it's funny when you can't feel or see what the airplane's doing. You're on instruments, and you're doing what the navigator tells you and what your instruments tell you. It's not like he's flying at a certain airspeed over place where you can have something on the ground that you can judge speed or altitude. But when you're on the gauges, it's a little different situation, and you have to depend on your navigator for your directions. Flying a hurricane on the ground. In Bermuda, the base weather gives the order to evacuate the base if he deems that the hurricane is going to come over the island. Well, he said it wasn't going to come that close to the island. And unfortunately, we waited long enough where we couldn't get the airplanes off the ground because of winds, and we had to get out and get our airplanes crewed up, not to fly, but to weather out the storm, because the damn storm came right over. And we put the brakes on the airplane, loaded them down with fuel, and put them into the wind. And you'd release your brakes about every 5 to 7 or 8 minutes, and the airplane would move into the direction of the wind with a high tail. It would go right into the wind. My airspeed indicator on the panel, without the props turning, 135 miles an hour. And that's flying speed for a B-29. And that thing, it just felt so light on the wings when those winds were buffeting out there. But we set through that storm and kept, and the tower, I remember the tower bailed out when the winds got to 110 because it was blowing water right through those doggone wind seals they had up in the tower. They evacuated it. But it was very interesting. We talked to the other B-29 guys on the ground, and here we were flying that airplane with the engines not running on the ground. And that was a real experience, sitting through that hurricane. Of course, you always leave the wives at home and go to work, you know, and you let them worry about themselves. Most beautiful. In a B-47, I was flying out of Savannah, Georgia, and the B-47, as you know, we couldn't penetrate into the eye at low altitude because of the turbulence. They were only stressed for 3 Gs. So this particular one, I was flying at night, and I was at 39,000, and I got over the center of the hurricane, and you could look down on that eye like that picture of that storm I showed a while ago. This happens to be a drop-zone operator or weather officer. You could look down, but the eye was open at 39. Now, this picture here was taken 400 miles high or something. But at 39,000, I could see the eye down there, and it was so clear in moonlight that night, I swore I could see the water. It was just the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. And I wanted to call my buddy ham operator and have him get on the radio and put it out over the air. And I thought about it twice. I said, God, the old man will can me if I do that. So I didn't do it. But I sought that out for years, and I wish I had done it now. Okay, that's it. Any questions? No questions.
He caught me by surprise. That's the fastest anyone's ever quit.
Somebody's going to have to help me because I can't hear.
When do you decide to cut into the edge to head towards the center?
John, let me go up here and I'll have him speak into the mic. Okay, and then
When did you decide to penetrate?
Yeah.
What determined?
Oh,
He's talking. Oh. Okay. How fast do you have to be going to cut into the eye of the hurricane?
well, in the southwest quadrant is the lightest winds. And all the airplanes that I flew, all the 3 or 4 that I flew in hurricanes, we went in at the regular cruise speed. We didn't adjust airspeed at all on the airplane. And normally in the southwest quadrant, you might have winds at 80, 90 knots. But in the airplane, you don't know the winds. You have to read that off of Doppler or navigation equipment that shows you what you're drifting or position of the airplane's drifting.
Another
Any
question?
other questions?
I'll come down here to you.
Somebody else had a question?
Yes, right here, just a second.
Coming from the East Coast, there's a lot of hurricanes through the year. How come the Pacific, which is bigger than the Atlantic, how comes there's no storms like that out here in the West?
Well, that's easy. You got more water. They form over water, and I didn't have a map with me on this presentation. It showed all the hurricanes over 2 years that developed in the Atlantic, and they were all far east of Puerto Rico. In fact, a lot of them over near the coast of Africa, where they first started forming. And we were aware of those when we were running daily missions out of Bermuda, because we were going down almost to Puerto Rico, and we had a triangular course there that we could pick up any variation in pressure. Okay, yeah, that shows. I don't know whether you can read that from back there, but they gave the number of positions, and the positions here on the left side of the number, and this shows the date on them, so I won't go into those. But those are the tracks, and you see where most of them form over in the far east part, just off of Africa. Those hardly didn't hit the East Coast at all, but I'm sure the warnings were up. Any other questions?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to answer this gentleman's question. In the Pacific, you still have super typhoons, not hurricanes, but most of the time they form a few degrees north of the equator and move east to west into the Asia.
I didn't follow. On the equator, what?
A few degrees north of the equator.
We didn't go south of the equator.
No, but I mean, most of the typhoons form a few degrees north of the equator in the northern hemisphere and move westward into the Philippines and the Chinese coast and Japan and that area.
I was stationed north of the equator in all my overseas duties, so I didn't get anything lower.
No, that's all north in the northern hemisphere.
Can you tell me what I can't make out what he's saying.
He's just making a comment, John. He's not asking a question.
Oh.
He was just commenting on what you had to say.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, he was answering he was expanding on the other guy's questions. Question over here? Yes.
Okay.
I don't think he can hear too well from this, so you'll need to repeat the questions. Okay.
Two things. One, when I was stationed in Amarillo Air Force Base back in the late 60s, there were 4 F-4 Phantoms. I think it was 4 or 6 of them there that all had weather painted on their tail. Would you have any idea why those F-4 Phantoms would have weather?
No. One of my favorite airplanes, but I never flew it.
I was often wondered that if it was just diversionary, then maybe they had some other reason for them to have weather on them.
Not in my knowledge. They weren't in weather reconnaissance.
Yes, question over here.
I just wondered how many planes were lost and how many people are lost doing this job.
Well, we lost one in the Pacific when I was stationed at Bermuda, and there was one other one lost, and they don't know whatever happened. When the plane goes into a storm, and that's the last you hear of it, you don't have any idea what happened to others. Airplane failure, hurricane, bad weather, something that happened to it, but they just disappeared. And they sent up search missions for days and never found a trace of it.
John, oh yeah, okay. When I was in the Navy, I was on a destroyer, and we went, once a year we went over to Westpac, and we would average about 6 typhoons and 9 gales each time we went. We very seldom walked on the deck. We were on the bulkheads all the time, rocking up to 60 degrees and things like that. But I just wondered, now, we had some really interesting hurricanes. We got into the eye one time that I remember, and it was very nice and calm, and then so we enjoyed ourselves for a while that we were waiting to get out of it. But this was all in the North and South China Sea, and mostly around Formosa, or Taiwan as they call it now.
Were you in that one that Halsey lost 2 ships?
No, but that was before they learned how to ballast their ships.
Well, I was flying missions in Japan, and when we were returning from a mission, got in the edge of that hurricane, and that's before I had any hurricane experience. But in B-29s, and you just charge on through it because the airplane normally will take it. But we weren't in the eye or anything. But Halsey lost 2 ships and crew on that one from Japan. And that particular storm, we had so much water on Tinian, where I was stationed. I had pictures of guys swimming to the mess hall. It was 4 feet deep.
Boy, that must have been great tasting food. Andy, you have a question.
Not a question, but a comment. If you look in the dictionary, you will find that in defining a hurricane and a typhoon, they say the same thing, only difference is that they qualify a hurricane on the East Coast and on the Atlantic, and a typhoon is in the Pacific.
Mm-hmm. They name them typhoons in the Pacific, hurricanes in the East, and typhoons are much bigger, larger in diameter, and they're much more dangerous with higher winds because they have more water, warm water, to generate. And that's what they do over water. They generate. Okay?
Yes. One more comment, then we'll let you all go. This is it.
My father was stationed in Okinawa right after World War II, and he was the port officer at Naha. And we had a typhoon come in while we were there. I was about 6 years old at the time. And we lived in Quonset huts. That was all that was left on that island. That island burned from one end to the other, so there was nothing left. So our Quonset hut was on the side of a hill, held down by 2 cables. And we spent 6 hours under those cables during the first half of the typhoon. My father drove home in a Jeep, picked us up. We went out to as close as we could get to the ocean during the eye. We went back, got back under the bed, and my dad left to go back down to Naha, and we got to spend the next 6 hours going through that typhoon. We heard later, at least this is what I remember, something around one of the worst ever 200-mile-an-hour winds, and whatever was left after the war that hadn't been blown away was blown away during that. It was really, really something.
Well, it's proved that if you're in a brick home or concrete, you usually can weather the storm. But if you're in a wooden framed house and a storm hits directly, you're in bad way. And I've had to sit out a few of myself, but I was in modern homes, and I think the winds only got up to a little over 100 miles an hour. We were floating under those.